My subject for today, diet and spirituality. Reforming our habits of eating and drinking. A salvation issue. Now, some people might think that that's quite a statement to make, that our habits of eating and drinking could be a salvation issue. But we have the following quote from Ellen White. It's found in the book Counsels on Diets and Foods, page 40. It says, "He who indulges self must bear the penalty. In the judgment, we shall see how seriously God regards the violation of the laws of health. And I don't think that that's going to be lightly." As we go through this morning's presentation, I do not want to be presenting my own ideas. I want to be letting inspiration speak. And so we're going to see that my presentation is heavily quote-driven, and you're going to find that most quotes come from the book Counsels on Diets and Foods by Ellen White. Diet and spirituality. Why is it so important? Well, we're told that we must understand health reform and that it should be given a prominent place. We're told, although the health reform is not the third angel's message, it is closely connected with it. It is a subject that we must understand in order to be prepared for the events that are close upon us, and it should have a prominent place. So we're told that it should have a prominent place, and that without understanding it, we will not be prepared for the events that are close upon us. We're counselled to carefully study it. We're told, since the laws of nature are the laws of God, it is plainly our duty to give these laws careful study. We should study these requirements, their requirements in regard to our own bodies, and conform to them. And yet we're told that there are few who are sufficiently aroused in regard to the health reform. She writes, "There are but few as yet who are aroused sufficiently to understand how much their habits of diet have to do with their health, their characters, their usefulness in this world, and their eternal destiny." And then she writes, "Sabbath keepers, that's us, who are looking for the soon appearing of their Saviour, we should be the last to manifest a lack of interest in this great work of reform." Furthermore, we're told that the Lord is waiting for his people to become wise in understanding health reform. For she writes, "The Lord is waiting for his people to become wise in understanding." God has given us great light. What a privilege. And if we walk in this light, we shall see his salvation. That's quite a statement. Part of the reason why Jesus has not yet returned, we're told, is that he is waiting for us to become wise in these matters. And we are reminded of how great light, which we believe we have in this church, how with great light comes great responsibility. We're told that if we walk in this light, then we shall see his salvation. We're told that the temptation to indulge appetite is only going to increase. We're told Satan has overcome his millions by tempting them to the indulgence of appetite. And as we near the close of time, Satan's temptation to indulge appetite will only become more powerful and more difficult to overcome. So if we delay this work of reform, it's going to become increasingly hard to gain the victory. Then we're told something very sad. We're told that health reform is a big problem amongst our people. She writes, "I am sorry that there are many of our people who do not strictly follow the light on health reform. Those who in their habit transgress the principles of health and do not heed the light that the Lord has given them will surely suffer the consequences." So again, we have a statement making clear two things. One, that it's our duty to strictly follow the light that we have been given. and 2, that if we do not, there will be consequences. We're told that some have sneered at the work of reform and have said it was all unnecessary, that it was an excitement to divert minds from present truth. They have said that matters were being carried to extremes. But then she writes, such do not know what they're talking about. So there's no room for doubt, brothers and sisters. Health reform needs to be taken very seriously and is far from being an excitement to divert minds from present truth. Indeed, she says that there's need of decided change. She writes, there's need of decided change. As a people, we need to humble our hearts before God. For the scars of inconsistency are on our practice. And then she continues and says that many professed health reformers are nothing less than gluttons. And God forbid, brothers and sisters, that be you or I. She then says that the indulgence of appetite is a barrier to the work going forward. It has a real impact on our spirituality. She says that by unwise eating, men and women are unfitted for the work that they might do without injury to themselves if they would only eat simply. And she says that no man, that's not one soul, can become a successful workman in spiritual things until he observes what? Strict temperance in his dietetic habits. And so we see that our habits in eating and drinking are inseparably linked to our spiritual well-being. And we're told that as we near the close of time, we must rise higher and still higher. It is to be a continual work of reform. She writes, as we near the close of time, we must rise higher and still higher upon the question of health reform and Christian temperance, presenting it in a more positive and decided manner. We must strive continually to educate the people, not only by our own words, but by our practice. And then she writes, precept and practice combined have a telling influence. So let's take the abundance of light that we have available to us and put it into practice so that our message really does have a telling influence upon the world and we can hasten Christ's return. We're told that indulging appetite affects not only our physical strength, but also our intellectual and moral strength. For she says, the abuses of the stomach, by the gratification of appetite, are the fruitful source of most church trials. The sin of intemperate eating, eating too frequently, too much, and of rich, unwholesome food destroys the healthy action of the digestive organs, affects the brain, perverts the judgment, preventing rational, calm, healthy thinking and acting. It's quite a thought, isn't it, that the gratification of appetite is the fruitful source of most church trials. If we had our appetites wholly under control, many of the church trials would disappear. In my studies for today's presentation, I came across two striking phrases which appeared repeatedly, time and time again. I've not included them all here, don't worry. But the first phrase that I will look at briefly is the greatest. In other words, there's nothing greater. Just a few of the phrases that I found were, sins of the greatest magnitude are committed through the indulgence of perverted appetite. That's of the greatest magnitude, brothers and sisters. Indulgence of appetite is the greatest cause of physical and mental debility and lies largely at the foundation of feebleness and even premature death. Indulged appetite is the greatest hindrance to mental improvement and soul sanctification. And the greatest objection to health reform is that this people, again that's us brothers and sisters, is that this people do not live it out. And the second phrase that I came across is, it is impossible. In other words, it simply cannot be done. She writes, it is impossible for those who indulge the appetite to attain to Christian perfection. The Spirit of God cannot come to our help and assist us in perfecting Christian characters while we are indulging our appetites to the injury of health. It's impossible, brothers and sisters. We're told that it's impossible for you to increase in spiritual strength while your appetite and passions are not under what? Under perfect control. And then she tells us that failing to act in accordance with the light given on health reform is sin. And if anyone's wondering how I can make such a statement, listen to this. It is a duty, it is just as much a sin to violate the laws of our being as to break one of the 10 commandments. For we cannot do either without breaking God's law. We cannot love the Lord with all our heart, mind, soul, and strength while we are loving our appetites, our tastes, a great deal better than we love the Lord. She tells us that it's a duty to know how to preserve the body in the very best condition of health. And what's more, it's a sacred duty to live up to the light which God has graciously given. If we close our eyes to the light, for fear we shall see our wrongs, which we are unwilling to forsake, our sins are not lessened, but increased. And she writes that the indifference with which the health books, such as Counsels on Diet and Foods, the indifference with which the health books have been treated by many is an offence to God. She gives us the promise, all may see if they will. If they choose darkness rather than light, their criminality will be none the less. God has given you a habitation to care for and to preserve in the best condition for his service and glory. And so we see that all may see if they will. Ignorance, when we have this light available to us, is sin. When we look at the history of the human appetite, we see that it's a very, very sad one. We start with man's fall from Eden, where she writes that the first great evil was intemperance in eating and drinking. Man fell through the indulgence of appetite. Fast forwarding to the flood, we're told that the people who lived before the flood ate animal food, which at the time was unlawful. And they gratified their lusts until their cup of iniquity was full, and God cleansed the earth of its moral pollution by a flood. Sodom and Gomorrah. We're told that the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah was on account of their great wickedness. But then listen to the order of things which led to that great wickedness. They gave loose rein, so they first gave loose rein to their intemperate appetites, then to their corrupt passions, until they were so debased and their sins were so abominable that their cup of iniquity was full and they were consumed with fire from heaven. And then a final instance to look at is the journey of the Hebrews to the promised land. And this contains a very striking message. She writes, through them, he, the Lord, desired to bless and teach the world. He provided them with the food best adapted for this purpose, not flesh, but manna, the bread of heaven. He tested them on appetite, as he did man in Eden, and murmuring and rebellion resulted. And then listen to this. Had they proved faithful to God, he would have taken them through the wilderness in the brief period of 11 days. Wow. But they did not sustain the trial of their faith, and in consequence of yielding to the clamours of appetite, they fell all along the way in the wilderness, so that only 2 of the adults who left Egypt were permitted to reach Canaan. And then she writes, I repeat it, the history of the human appetite is a sad one. Can you imagine, brothers and sisters, God intended to take them to the promised land in 11 days? You know, could it be the reason, or one of the reasons why we are not in heaven today, is because of the condition of our appetites? Earlier, we heard how God is waiting for his people to become wise in understanding. And in 1 Corinthians 10, 6 and 11, we are told, now these things were our examples, to the intent we should not lust after evil things, as they also lusted. Now all these things happened unto them for examples, and they are written for our admonition, upon whom the ends of the world are come. Maybe, just maybe, our continued wilderness wanderings in the world today are the result of our indulgence of appetite. It was well over 100 years ago now that God saw fit to send so great light on health and nutrition to God's remnant church. Should not greater reform, therefore, be seen among us today? Now, before I continue, I want us to be absolutely clear that the required reforms that are set out are to increase and not decrease our happiness. God intends them for our good. He does not want us to be unhappy, to burden us. He wants us to be happy. We find the following quote. The great object of hygienic reform is to secure the highest possible development of mind and soul and body. I want that, brothers and sisters, don't you? All the laws of nature, which are the laws of God, are designed for our good, and obedience to them will promote our happiness in this life and will aid us in a preparation for the life to come. Now, so far in this presentation, you may feel that your life is in harmony with many of the statements, perhaps even all the statements that you have heard. But let us now see just how good our understanding of some of the specific required reforms actually is. I caution that you may find some of the statements new to you and perhaps even troubling. You may find that your current circumstances just do not allow you to immediately put all of these counsels into practice. But if so, take time with the Lord and pray about it. He blesses the sincere in heart. He opens the doors that will enable you to bring your life into harmony with the counsel given. The reform is not meant to be immediate. It is meant to be one of continual progression. We are to rise higher and still higher. We're not expected to be able to do it all at once, but entire, perfect conformity is where our eyes must be fixed. Sacrifices will need to be made. We may even find that our jobs need to be changed, but we have the promise that the sacrifices will be worth it and that we are not alone, for God will be there, journeying with us along the way. The Lord poured out all of heaven for us, we are told. The question, brothers and sisters, is whether we are willing to give our all for him. And so we continue. Meal times. We're told that meal times should be spaced out, regular, and with absolutely nothing in between. She says a minimum of 5 hours should elapse between each meal. She writes, the stomach must have careful attention. It must not be kept in continual operation. Give this misused and much abused organ some peace and quiet and rest. 5 hours at least should elapse between each meal. And in another one of her statements, she says 5 or even 6. She tells us that meal times are to be in no case irregular. Writing, if dinner is eaten an hour or two before the usual time, the stomach is unprepared for the new burden, for it has not yet disposed of the food eaten at the previous meal, and has not the vital force for new work. Thus the system is overtaxed. Neither should the meal times be delayed 1 or 2 hours to suit circumstances or in order that a certain amount of work may be accomplished. Definitely a personal struggle when I'm trying to meet a client deadline to remember to just stop at the right time and eat my food. And we're told that there should not be so much as a morsel in between meals. For she writes, I am astonished to learn that after all the light that has been given in this place, many of you eat between meals. You should never let a morsel pass your lips between your regular meals. Eat what you ought, but eat it at one meal and then wait until the next. And we're told that all our efforts at eating regularly and not tasting anything between meals will be repaid with pleasure. She writes, if all would eat at regular periods, not tasting anything between meals, they would be ready for their meals and would find a pleasure in eating that would repay them for their effort. Guidance on meal size. She tells us that meals should reduce in size throughout the day. She says, it is the custom and order of society to take a slight breakfast. Looking in the world today, I would say that statement remains very, very true. But this is not the best way to treat the stomach. At breakfast time, the stomach is in better condition to take care of more food than at the second or third meal of the day. She continues, the habit of eating a sparing breakfast and a large dinner is wrong. Make your breakfast correspond more nearly to the heartiest meal of the day. She says the last meal is generally the most hearty and is often taken just before retiring. This is reversing the natural order. A hearty meal should never be taken so late in the day. Should these persons change their practice and eat but 2 meals a day, and nothing between meals, not even an apple, a nut, or any kind of fruit, the result would be seen in a good appetite and greatly improved health. That, my brothers and sisters, is a promise. Greatly improved health will result. And with greatly improved health, I believe, we'd be able to take forward the Lord's work with added impetus, renewed energy, and vigour. But whilst meals are to reduce in size through the day, we are told that they should additionally reflect daily circumstances. She writes, if your time to eat is limited, do not bolt your food Again, a problem with me. But eat less and masticate, that is, chew slowly. The benefit derived from food does not so much depend on the quantity eaten as on its thorough digestion, nor the gratification of taste so much on the amount of food swallowed as on the length of time it remains in the mouth. Simple things, brothers and sisters, but things so often neglected in the fast-paced world in which we live. She writes, when one is excited, anxious, or hurried, it is better not to eat until rest or relief is found. And she says that if she has especially important work to do, she limits the quantity of food that she ate. And we find plenty of warnings against intemperance when it comes to meal size. Excessive eating of the best of food, so not of the poor quality, excessive eating of the best of food will produce a morbid condition. And if the food is not the most healthful, the effects will be still more injurious. Intemperance in eating, even of food of the right quality, will have a prostrating influence upon the system and will blunt the keener and holier emotions. Again, we see the impact between diet and our spiritual well-being. An amazing statement. There are men and women of excellent natural ability. These are intelligent people, brothers and sisters, who do not accomplish half what they may if they would exercise self-control in the denial of appetite. Wow. How sad and how our Lord must be grieved. We're told that the system receives less nourishment from too great a quantity of food, even of the right quality, than from a moderate quantity taken at regular periods. And we are given the following principle to follow. Never cheat the stomach out of that which health demands. Don't starve yourself, brothers and sisters, but never abuse it by placing upon it a load which it should not bear. Cultivate self-control, restrain appetite, keep it under the control of reason. Another astounding statement, she wrote, I eat enough to satisfy the wants of nature, but when I get up from the table, my appetite is just as good as when I sat down. We're told that most people will do better on 2 meals a day rather than 3. For she writes, most people enjoy better health while eating 2 meals a day than 3. That's most. More than 50%, a majority. So if we look at everyone here in the room today, we would expect that more than half of you would do better on 2 meals a day than 3. Let's continue. She writes that if a third meal be eaten at all, it should be light and several hours before going to bed. Supper, when taken at an early hour, interferes with the digestion of the previous meal. When taken later, it is not itself digested before bedtime. Thus, the stomach fails of securing proper rest. And so we see that whenever we have this third meal, if we're not very careful, then there's a real danger that it will interfere either with the digestion of the previous meal or that it will be not digested before we lie down to sleep. In terms of why some people eat the third meal, we're told to some it is a temptation too strong to be resisted to see others eat the third meal. And they imagine they are hungry when the feeling is not a call of the stomach for food, but a desire of the mind, a mind that has not been fortified with firm principle and disciplined to self-denial. We're told the more the appetite is indulged, the more will be its clamours for gratification. Those going from 3 meals a day to 2 will find that it's not initially easy. We're told those who are changing from 3 meals a day to 2 will at first be troubled, more or less with faintness, especially about the time they have been in the habit of eating their third meal. But if they persevere for a short time, this faintness will disappear. So some of these reforms will require struggle and perseverance, but we can, in Christ's strength, overcome. Another word of warning: if those who only eat 2 meals have the idea that they must eat enough at the second meal to answer for the third meal also, they will injure their digestive organs. So don't go cramming that food. If you're replacing the third meal without a third meal, don't just pile it all into lunch. 2 meals a day is not for everyone, for we're told that under some circumstances, persons may require a third meal. But again, we find the counsel that this should, however, if taken at all, be very light and of food most easily digested. Then she gives us some examples. Crackers, the English biscuit, or zwieback, and fruit or cereal coffee are the foods best suited for the evening meal. Did you catch that? Crackers and fruit, examples of the foods best suited to any evening meal. And the third meal should be very light, a precise opposite of being the largest meal of the day. We heard that the last meal should be several hours before bed. And yet she says many indulge in the pernicious habit of eating just before sleeping. The stomach, when we lie down to rest, should have its work all done, that it may enjoy rest as well as the other portions of the body. The work of digestion should not be carried on through any period of the sleeping hours. For we're told that the sleep is disturbed, the brain and nerves are wearied, the appetite for breakfast is impaired, the whole system is unrefreshed and is unready for the day's duties. Sounds quite serious. And we're told that for persons of sedentary habits, so those who do not do a lot of exercise during each day, late suppers are particularly harmful. And with them, the disturbance created is often the beginning of disease that ends in death. We're told that there's a class of people for whom regular fasting will bring great benefit. For she writes, there are some who would be benefited more by abstinence from food for a day or two every week than by any amount of treatment or medical advice. To fast 1 day a week would what? It would be of incalculable benefit to them. Again, what a statement. Fasting a day or two a week would be of incalculable benefit and bring to this class of people greater benefit than could any amount of treatment or medical advice. So if you're struggling with your health, it may be something to pray about whether to give it a try. Drinking at meal times. The counsel is that we shouldn't drink at meal times. She writes, many make a mistake in drinking cold water with their meals. The more liquid that is taken into the stomach with the meals, the more difficult it is for the food to digest. Foods should not be washed down. No drink is needed with meals. But if anything is needed to quench thirst, pure water, that's pure water, drunk some little time before or after the meal, is all that nature requires. In terms of the foods that we're meant to eat, we should be using only simple, wholesome, and palatable foods. She writes, if ever there were a time when the diet should be of the most simple kind, it is now. The less feverish the diet, the more easily can the passions be controlled. Gratification of taste should not be consulted, irrespective of physical, intellectual, or moral health. The more careful you are in your diet, the more simple and unstimulating the food that sustains the body in its harmonious action, the more clear will be your conception of duty, the spiritual connection once again. There needs to be a careful review of every habit, every practice. Another sad statement. Not all who profess to believe in dietetic reform are really reformers. With many, the reform consists merely in discarding certain unwholesome foods. Perhaps people who believe it's all about just being vegan. There's so much more, brothers and sisters, to being vegan. They do not understand clearly the principles of health, and their tables, still loaded with harmful dainties, are far from being an example of Christian temperance and moderation. And she implores us, let us never bear a testimony against health reform by failing to use wholesome, palatable food in place of the harmful articles of diet that we have discarded. She warns us in relation to processed foods, many of which are anything but healthy. She tells us that the less processed the food, the better. Grains and fruits prepared free from grease and in as natural condition as possible should be the food for the tables of all who claim to be preparing for translation to heaven. We must be satisfied with pure, simple food prepared in a simple manner. This should be the diet of high and low. Adulterated substances are to be avoided. And finally, all mixed and complicated foods are injurious to the health of human beings. In relation to fruit and vegetables, we're told that they should be of a good quality and should not be eaten at the same meal. She writes, let there be a plentiful supply of fruits and vegetables that are in a good condition. Overripe fruit or wilted vegetables ought not to be used. Vegetables and fruit should not be eaten at the same meal. So we're told that fruit and vegetables are to be of a good condition. They're not to be of a poor quality. And therefore, whilst I believe that we are right to economise where possible, we are not to economise at the expense of quality when it comes to the articles of food which we purchase, food which we put into our bodies, which are temples of the Holy Spirit. Spicy, hot, or fiery food, we're told that this should be discarded along with all other irritating condiments. She writes, you have perhaps seen a picture of the stomach of one who is addicted to strong drink. Quite a picture. A similar condition is produced under the irritating influence of fiery spices. Do I think fiery spices includes foods such as chilies, my friends? I most certainly do. We continue. Condiments are injurious in their nature. Mustard, pepper, spices, pickles, and other things of a like character. What do? They irritate the stomach and make the blood feverish and impure. Again, she writes, the inflamed condition of a drunkard's stomach is often pictured as illustrating the effect of alcoholic liquors. A similarly inflamed condition is produced by the use of irritating condiments. Soon, ordinary food does not satisfy the appetite. The system feels a want, a craving for something more stimulating. That's addiction, brothers and sisters. These are strong statements and strong warnings, and let none of us be found with any such things in our food cupboards. We're told of the havoc that they wreak when it comes to digestion. Condiments so frequently used by who? By those of the world, are ruinous to the digestion. Next, we find three things which tend toward increasing the desire to drink at mealtime, something we heard that we should not be doing. She writes, this was to an individual, do not eat largely of salt. Give up bottled pickles. Keep fiery spiced food out of your stomach, and the irritation which calls for so much drink will cease to exist. So remove these things from your diet, brothers and sisters, and you will find that the desire to drink at mealtimes will be greatly reduced. In relation to a child who was subject to eating fiery condiments, this child was nervous and had irritability of temper. We're told these fiery condiments were well calculated to produce such a condition. Here we find a statement showing how, even outside of the house, Ellen White took great care with what she ate. She recognized that our duty to the Lord extends far outside of the home. She wrote, on my frequent journeys across the continent, I do not patronize restaurants, dining car, or hotels for the simple reason that I cannot eat the food there provided. The dishes are highly seasoned with salt and pepper, creating an almost intolerable thirst. They would irritate and inflame the delicate coating of the stomach. Luxuries. We all like a treat. We're told to discard luxuries, neither healthful nor necessary. She writes, our tables are frequently spread with luxuries, neither healthful nor necessary. Why? Because we love these things more than we love self-denial, freedom from disease, and soundness of mind. Should our tables be at all times set with simple, healthful food, avoiding all luxuries, all extravagance, what would it do? It would show the sanctifying power of the truth and would have a telling influence upon unbelievers. She says, let alone those sweet dessert dishes that are placed on the table. You do not need them. You want a clear mind to think after God's order. The less of sweet foods that are eaten, the better. These cause disturbances in the stomach and produce impatience and irritability. She does, however, say that plain, simple pie may serve as dessert, but she caveats this. But when one eats 2 or 3 pieces merely to gratify an inordinate appetite, what? He unfits himself for the service of God. And we're told that some, after partaking largely of other food, will take dessert not because they need it, but because it tastes good. And she says about such people, he who will do this has never educated himself to practice self-denial. He cannot see the injury he is doing to himself. Health foods that aren't health foods. She writes about many such items. She says there are various confections that have been invented by manufacturers of health foods, and recommended as perfectly harmless, great marketing perhaps on the front of the packet. But I have a different testimony to bear concerning them. They are not truly healthful, and their use should not be encouraged. We need to keep more strictly to a simple diet of fruits, nuts, grains, and vegetables. Look at the ingredients list, brothers and sisters, if you're unsure whether something is good or bad for you. Baking soda and baking powder, the counsel, at least back then, was that these are unfit to enter into the stomach. She writes, saleratus, which is sodium bicarbonate, or baking soda, which is the main ingredient of baking powder. She says saleratus, in any form, that's in any form, brothers and sisters, should not be introduced into the stomach, for the effect is fearful. What does it do? It eats the coatings of the stomach, causes inflammation, and frequently poisons the entire system. And then she says, some plead, I cannot make good bread or gems unless I use soda or saleratus. But then she says, you surely can if you become a scholar and will learn. Now, these days I hear some talking about the different varieties of baking soda and baking powder, whether or not they are aluminium-free, whether or not they are chemically balanced. But here, the counsel was that saleratus in any form should not enter the stomach, for the effect is fearful. And given it was possible back then and remains possible today to learn alternative methods, I believe it would be prudent to wholly discard them. Bread. We're told that wholemeal bread is better than white. For she writes, fine flour, that is white bread, does not impart to the system the nourishment that is to be found in unbolted wheat bread, that's wholemeal bread. We're told its common use will not keep the system in the best condition. And we're told that fine flour, i.e. white bread, is a frequent cause of constipation and other unhealthful conditions. Now, the same counsel, brothers and sisters, would apply to things such as brown rice versus white rice, whole wheat pasta versus white pasta. It's exactly the same principle. The more it represents the whole food, the more nutrients are left in the food. We're told that bread should be thoroughly baked. Bread should never have the slightest taint of sourness. It should be cooked until it is most thoroughly done. Thus, all softness and stickiness will be avoided. We're told that raised bread, so bread made with yeast or some other raising agent, should not be eaten hot or new. For when hot or new, raised bread of any kind is difficult of digestion, it should never appear on the table. But we're told that this rule does not, however, apply to unleavened bread, and that fresh rolls made of wheaten meal, that is wholemeal flour, without yeast or leaven, and baked in a well-heated oven, are both wholesome and palatable. We're told that bread a few days old is actually better than fresh bread. We're told thoroughly cooked bread, 2 or 3 days old, will be more healthful than fresh bread. Food temperature. We're told both food and drink should not be too hot nor too cold. Why? Food and drink should not be eaten very hot or very cold. If food is cold, the vital force of the stomach is drawn upon in order to warm it before digestion can take place. Cold drinks are injurious for the same reason. We're told hot drinks are not required except as a medicine. The stomach is greatly injured by a large quantity of hot food and hot drink. We're told we shouldn't have a repetitive diet. There should be variety between meals, but at every one meal, there should be limited variety. She writes, there should not be many kinds at one meal, but all meals should not be composed of the same kinds of food without variation. Foods should be prepared with simplicity, yet with a nicety which will invite the appetite. She continues, the cook should tax her inventive powers to vary the dishes she prepares for the table, and the stomach should not be compelled to take the same kinds of food meal after meal. Again, going against convention, she says, set out all courses at the beginning. Custom has decreed that the food should be placed upon the table in courses. Not knowing what is coming next, one may eat a sufficiency of food which is perhaps not the best suited to him. When the last course is brought on, he often ventures to overstep the bounds and take the tempting dessert, which, however, proves anything but good for him. If all the food intended for a meal is placed on the table at the beginning, one has the opportunity to make the best choice. Something simple that we could all do. The Sabbath food should be more simple food and less should be eaten. She writes, we should not provide for the Sabbath a more liberal supply or a greater variety of food than for other days. Instead of this, the food should be more simple and less should be eaten. Why? In order that the mind may be clear and vigorous to comprehend spiritual things. For a clogged stomach means a clogged brain. She says that the most precious words may be heard and not appreciated because the mind is confused by an improper diet. And she says that by overeating on the Sabbath, many do more than they think to unfit themselves for receiving the benefit of its sacred opportunities. She says, oh, how many are low in the scale of spirituality because they will not deny their appetite? When such go to the house of God upon the Sabbath, they cannot hold their eyes open. And we're told that the most earnest appeals fail to arouse their leaden, insensible intellects. The camp meeting. She says that many of our camp meetings are far from what the Lord designed they should be. She says often the stomach is overburdened with food which is seldom as plain and simple as that eaten at home, where the amount of exercise taken is double or treble. What happens? This causes the mind to be in such a lethargy that it is difficult to appreciate eternal things. And then what happens? The meeting closes, and they are disappointed in not having enjoyed more of the Spirit of God. So when we're eating here today, brothers and sisters, don't eat too much. Some concluding thoughts. Nature will, sooner or later, utter her protest against the unreformed diet. For we're told nature bears abuse as long as she can without resisting. Then she arouses and makes a mighty effort to rid herself of the encumbrances and evil treatment that she has suffered. Then come headache, chills, fevers, nervousness, paralysis, and other evils, too numerous to mention. A wrong course of eating or drinking destroys health, and with it, the sweetness of life. But, praise the Lord, many can recover more or less fully. Where wrong habits of diet have been indulged, there should be no delay in reform. Efforts should be made to carefully preserve the remaining strength of the vital forces by removing every overtaxing burden. The stomach may never entirely recover health after long abuse, but a proper course of diet will save further debility, and many will recover more or less fully. Praise the Lord. We're told that we are not to urge sudden changes in diet upon those ignorant of our faith, for she writes, "Be careful not to urge those who are ignorant of our faith to make sudden changes in diet, thus bringing them to a premature test. Hold up the principles of health reform and let the Lord lead the honest in heart. But while we are not to urge sudden changes in diet upon those ignorant of our faith, you and I, brothers and sisters, should be working swiftly toward total abstinence from every hurtful thing." For she writes, "Those who would preserve their powers unimpaired for the service of God must observe strict temperance in the use of his bounties, as well as total abstinence from every injurious or debasing indulgence." Abstinence from all hurtful food and drink is the fruit of true religion. He who is thoroughly converted will abandon every injurious habit and appetite. By total abstinence, he will overcome his desire for health-destroying indulgences. I can promise you that the reform will not be easy. It will require struggle and perseverance. We're told those who, after seeing their mistakes, have courage to change their habits will find the reformatory process requires a struggle and much perseverance. But when correct tastes are once formed, they will realize that the use of the food, which they formerly regarded as harmless, was slowly but surely laying the foundation for dyspepsia, indigestion, and other diseases. Total victory is possible. In Christ's strength, we may be more than overcomers. She writes, if Christians will keep the body in subjection and bring all their appetites and passions under the control of enlightened conscience, feeling it a duty they owe to God and to their neighbours to obey the laws which govern health and life, they will have the blessing of physical and mental vigour. That's a promise. They will have moral power to engage in the warfare against Satan, and in the name of him who conquered appetite in their behalf, they may be more than conquerors on their own account. This warfare, we're told, is open to all who will engage in it. And a final appeal by Ellen White. Why do not men and women read and become intelligent upon these things, which so decidedly affect their physical, intellectual, and moral strength? Let us act our part, working out our salvation with fear and trembling. With fear and trembling, lest we make mistakes in the treatment of our bodies, which before God we are under obligation to keep in the most healthy condition possible.